They were threatening our democracy. That sounds good. That's artful. What about making it clearer that they were trying to nullify something that ordinary people had decided or had their representatives therefore also support? It's just that I worry that the term is worn out, and that's what happens to terms, or that it's more music than thought.
I was interested to read your column recently in the Times on the word democracy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And your evocation of the argument that George Orwell makes in his essay, Politics in the English Language, against the unreflective use of Latinate and Greek-rooted words that have crept into the English language to express ideas that could be just as effectively and more directly expressed by the use of good old Anglo-Saxon English words. And that whole argument about language and writing, I mean, it's a writer's kind of thing, and whatnot. And I wondered if you'd reprise that issue for us and tell us what you contributed with that column, because I found it to be very interesting.
Funny, that dovetails nicely with what we were talking about in terms of messages. It just bothered me to hear Biden and his allies talking about how Trump is a threat to democracy, because I think that in terms of how we actually receive sentences in our guts, that doesn't come across clearly. So you have a comparison between keep these dirty people out. That's one thing. That's one side. Then this man is a threat to democracy. Now, I know that we all know the dictionary definition of democracy. We all learned about it in school. Sure. But there's a difference between your intellectual knowledge and how your brain processes words and sentences in real time. Democracy. What does that really mean? And to the extent that you have to take a deep breath before you say what it means, I find that to be a problem. And this is just, it's the way English is. We have our Latinate words, as they're called, many of them Greek and many of them French. But we've got the fancy words, we've got the long words, and then we've got our original words. It's easy to forget that in many languages, there's no such thing as the big words we don't know. If you've got a language where most of the vocabulary is what it originally was, and there's some things borrowed in from other languages, maybe something like internet from English, but most of the words are just gadum, gadunka, gadum, gadunka, gadunka, gadunka. There's no such thing as, there are all these long words where we're not really always sure what they mean, because that's not how it works. Latin happened to have longer words than English did. But we've got our long words, and that's just the way it's going to be. But when it comes to democracy, part of the problem really is that you have these people who are calling themselves populists who want to take power away from the people. And the way that we talk about it is we say they're a threat to democracy. And when you say democracy, of course, in your mind, you start thinking, and you think of some person with, a periwig and a British accent pointing to the sky and making a speech, although actually the founding fathers did not have British accents. The British accent didn't exist then. But that's what democracy says. But what does it mean? It's about power and people. I think that for that concept, I'd like to talk about the power of the people rather than democracy, which sounds like special china that you bring out on holidays. It just bothered me. And so I wrote about it. I've got a little bit of feedback that suggests that I didn't mean that, or that I was stuck for a topic, or that I'm being a baby. No, I felt that very deeply. So Biden's saying, well, Trump, he's a threat to democracy. He's a threat to democracy. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? How are you making the urgency clear to somebody who's just sitting there listening with their cup of tea? People power. That's all.
Okay. Well, I thought what they meant was our democracy, and I thought it was a reference to January 6th, to Trump's usurpation or intention to usurp democratic process, to his potential to become an extra constitutional ruler in the fullness of time if he were to fulfill his supposed ambition, and that's what we would be defending ourselves against. And I thought there was an effective counter-argument to that position, Trump being a threat to our democracy, namely that because he actually is popular and potentially electable, extraordinary anti-democratic means needed to be undertaken in order to inhibit his ascendancy. The lawfare bringing of suits under pretense and relatively flabby legal argument in order to hamstring him, and the various other anti-Trump activities that have been undertaken since he emerged as a force in American politics in 2015-16 that was anti-democratic stuff. And in fact, it's the will of the people potentially being expressed through a Trump ascendancy that is the great threat to the establishment and the deployment of extra democratic means to prevent that. That's what I thought. And I didn't understand this wordsmith stuff. I mean, what is democracy? What's the plain spoken, non-Greek oriented word that we would use instead of democracy to talk about governance by the people? I think that's what we mean, right? The
Right.
majority rules.
And not governance, power. So the idea, because governance is another one of those words, but you can't get rid of, frankly, any of them. But what you say is that insurrection was an attempt to take power away from the people. Now, of course, you could say that the people doing the insurrecting themselves, were trying to keep their own power from being taken away. But the idea was that someone had been voted in by the people. That was the power of the people. And their vote, the power of their vote, there was an attempt to take it away with this insurrection. And so they were threatening our democracy. Well, that sounds good. That's artful. But what about making it clearer that they were trying to nullify, there's another one of those words, something that ordinary people had decided or had their representatives therefore also support? It's just that I worry that the term is worn out. And that's what happens to terms, or that it's more music than thought. I think I actually, in the original draft, I said something that didn't make it in. I said, the word is more resonance than signification. And they thought that was too complicated. Maybe it was, but it was what I meant. It's more resonance. It has a feeling to it than actual concrete meaning. Do you see what I mean, or does this sound like I'm just
do,
thinking?
And that's what Orwell was, as I recall that essay, Politics in the English Language of George Orwell, that's what he was objecting to.
Yeah.
He was objecting to, just tell me what you mean, and will you just be plain spoken about it, rather than trying to evoke a feeling in me by a kind of use of sounds that make me feel a certain way, rather than describing something concrete that I can put my hands on.
Exactly. That's all. Yeah, I was being Orwell. He got there before me. So did many people. But that basic sentiment and the word democracy has just often made me think of it because of how urgent the whole concept is, especially today. You're reminding me I have to think of what I'm going to write next. But yes, that was the last one.